warmly welcome everyone, and especially warm welcome to our guest lecturer, Dr. Zsuzsanna Varga. She is one of the most prominent researchers in the field of European agrarian history. Her main research focus over the years has been the history of socialist agriculture in Hungary. She is also currently head of the Modern Hungarian History Department at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest. She is a founding member of European Rural History Organization and currently its vice president. She has authored over 140 publications, including 6 monographs and 7 edited volumes. Her most recent monograph was published in the Harvard Cold War Studies book series, and it's called The Hungarian Agricultural Miracle, Sovietization and Americanization in a Communist Country. Her current research focuses on women in socialist and post-socialist rural transformations. So with all that being said, it is my pleasure and my honor to give the floor to Dr. Varga to introduce us to Hungarian agriculture and rural society in the period from the end of the Second World War to 2004.
Thank you very much for kind introductory words, and thank you very much for invitation, because I have heard a lot about this excellent institute. I met more and more colleagues at different conferences, and really it's a great pleasure now to be with you this afternoon. And the aim of my lecture is really to give you a broad overview on the big structural changes of the Hungarian agriculture and rural society in the second half of the 20th century, with the intention to stimulate our joint thinking and to help you understand more these big changes and to understand this framework in which, let's say, the rural women could be analyzed. You can see that it's a little bit a longue durée approach, but the focus will be on the socialist period, which is my main research interest. However, time by time I move back to the interwar period and I move forward with my research to the post-socialist period. And I hope that this unusual time span would be interesting and inspiring for you. The whole 20th century was a very stormy century, not only for Hungary, but for Central and Eastern European agriculture and those who were engaged in agriculture. And as you could see, there were 4 big structural changes which almost all of these countries had to face. There were a land reform wave after the First World War. There was another land reform wave after the Second World War. Collectivization appeared as from the late 40s, and after the collapse of socialist regimes, privatization and decollectivization started in almost every country. A little bit to introduce you the prehistory of the Hungarian agriculture and rural society, that time peasant society. Within this land reform wave after the First World War, Hungary represented a unique case with a very modest land reform. It affected only 6% of the agricultural land area, and more than 400,000 received very small plots, which means that the from the Austro-Hungarian time inherited bimodal unequal distribution of land remained until the mid-century. And this dual structure was really striking on both sides, that 80% of the peasant farms owned only 20% agricultural land area, while the other hand large estates which compose only less than 1% of the all farms owned 40% of the agricultural land area. You should remember this ratio, because once we shall be finding this after decades. And I just brought one statistical table from the mid-30s, which shows that this a little bit uniqueness of the Hungarian case, which was explained, or which was called that Hungary remained the quintessential home of the landed aristocracy in the interwar period. So the Hungarian aristocracy really was able to protect its own interest, and just devoted a symbolic part. So I don't have a magic pencil, but you can add these data. So I mentioned this 0.5% owned 40% of the land, and the other opposite 80%. So those who were below 5 hectares, and below 5 hectares even that time, it was not really enough to maintain a family. Were owning and cultivating 20% of the area, and you can imagine that what kind of fragmented structure is behind this statistical data. And in this statistical table, of course, those are not visible who did not own any land, and you can imagine that on these large-scale farms of the so the big and medium-sized farms, of course, many were employed. So they were such agricultural laborers, servants, daily workers. It was also a huge amount of people who considered themselves peasants but without land. And also those considered themselves peasants who had 2 or 3 hectares or 1 hectare, and they had to work on other estates to maintain the family, but they were thinking about themselves as peasants, and their dream was to get more land, which will provide enough a solid basis for their family. And as the emigration opportunities, overseas emigration, were very limited in interwar period, so this growing rural society could not leave the country, so which means that a huge labor force supply was at the countryside, and at the same time it was true that a huge hidden unemployment, rural unemployment, was characteristic in the interwar period. So to summarize this, I could just show these photos which show that in interwar period, Hungarian agriculture was a very poorly mechanized agriculture based on human and animal workforce, and we could say that it was a pre-industrial stage. And in this capitalist economy, many feudal features were still remained. so this society was facing the next three structural changes from above and sometimes from outside initiated, and that's why I put together this parallel chronology, and it shows that every change of the political system went hand in hand with a deep intervention into the land property structure. And I could tell you that I think it is still not very well known in the Western literature, because I think land reform and collectivization studied also and quite well, but the last change with the collapse of socialist systems, about this big change, it's not very well known that there was a deep intervention into the landed property with the privatization. So, and if you look at these data, you can see that, for example, that generation whose members were adults already at the end of the Second World War, they had to adjust their strategies first to the land reform, then the collectivization. And let's see how was this, and also before going to the details, I wanted to show one a little bit macro perspective, that every time when this political intervention happened and changed also the landed property structure, the political intervention was always favoring only one type of farming. First, it was only favoring the peasant farm, small-scale farming, with the land reform, because the big and medium-sized large estates were demolished and eliminated. Then when the collectivization finished in 1961, of course the large-scale farming was favored, and after the change of system, the winning political parties favored the private farming, but in reality it resulted a little bit different structure, a little bit similar dual structure like in the interwar period. So this is this ratio what I wanted to point. So how was this land reform in 1945? I just listed few special features, but I think what you should remember that so there was on the one hand a huge hunger for getting land, and there were competing visions of the different parties that what kind of principles the land reform should follow: efficiency or political justice or social justice. And as the Communist Party with the Soviet assistance was quicker than the smallholders party, who had a long time elaborated plan for such a land reform. So communists favored and initiated such a land reform, where you see more than 600 people received on average 3 hectares. So again, but that time it had for them it meant a lot, and as this document what I put into the right, it was such a official document about this new private ownership. So they were registered. So these new owners, ownership was registered in these local authorities, land registry offices. So they were very proud, and Hungary became from this, so that was a sharp change from, let's say, from one week to another, that the large scale and medium sized farms dissolved, and smallholders, Hungary became a smallholders country. But these new owners, you can imagine that after we were after the Second World War, they were lacking almost everything. You can imagine that proper so animal stuff, tools, and many families were missing the male workforce because they were prisoners of war somewhere, and for many years, and the women were applying for these land parcels. And I think it is also a symbolic little photo, because on the right side a woman is serving as a desk for those who were registering, and this land reform also deserves, I think, a deeper analysis, because as the upper limit was this more than 100 hectares, so that the richer peasants could maintain their properties, but they felt very unfair that those received more land who had more children. And in the traditional peasants' mentality in the Hungarian countryside, because of the special inheritance system, when every child inherited a parcel, a plot, of course, those who had more tried to keep this standard of living and having just one child. So in the eyes of these families, it was very unfair, because maybe these families wanted to have more children, but as they did not want they wanted to provide the same level of living standard for one child. That's why they felt that it is not unfair and it is not fair. So there were different inner conflicts within the society. But from the perspective of the decision makers, it was a very clever move, because they forwarded the task of this post-war reconstruction of agriculture to these new owners, because they were so much motivated, so long waited for becoming an owner, that they did not care how they start to cultivate this land. I know many stories from interviews, because I started making interviews already in my university years. And for example, I'm coming from a northern part of Hungary, and we are famous for making pálinka, and pálinka was very well, could be put and saved during the war, so they could change or find some horse and to sell this pálinka, and they had, but they did not receive any central help for this. So they put lots of efforts on family level, on this micro level, and and 5 years later, or even 4 years later, the big political level, a huge change appeared, and as the growing Cold War tensions, the Soviet Union, the Soviet leadership, the Stalinist leadership, thought that they should homogenize the region, which they acquired after the Second World War. And they were, at the same time, they were preparing for the Third World War. You know it very well, so I don't go into details. And they nationalized the industry, nationalized the trade, and the only big sector where the private ownership was still dominant was agriculture. So they started collectivization. And if you look at this chronology, I think it's really astonishing to see that what a decade Hungarian village people had to experience from the late 40s until the early 60s. So almost every second or third year, the most secure piece of their economy, the land, was shaken. Agitators came, they forced them to join the cooperatives. It was the first collectivization waves, but I shall tell you that so much problems appeared that Hungary, which was always famous for its agriculture export, had to import grain already in 52, which showed that the results of this. So it was a very, very, very dramatic decade, and nowadays most of my colleagues still study these collectivization and decollectivization waves using this interpretation of this victimization. So they see peasants as only the victims of this forceful process. However, if we study these ways of collectivization, decollectivization within one framework, we can analyze and we can detect also how the peasants reacted to these repeated waves and how the different groups of this very heterogeneous peasant society I described you very, very briefly in the beginning. So those who had land before the Second World War, the new owners, those who were left out, so they reacted differently, and I think we should really pay attention to this. And also, for example, when we study how the women within these peasant families, what kind of strategies they evolved. And of course, this Hungarian case was part of this bigger process, and Yugoslavia and Poland were the two countries where the collectivization was never completed. Yugoslavia was the first which stopped in the year of Stalin's death, and Poland in 56. But most of the countries finished in the late 50s, early 60s. And also, I brought this chronological table because to show that these three ways of collectivization were not the same, because of course were not the same because it was different during when Stalin was alive, and it was a little bit different when Khrushchev was in power, because Khrushchev also had to draw some conclusions from the Polish 1956 events, the Hungarian 1956 events, and so on. So how to, and also I wanted to draw your attention to two features which sometimes even researchers forget, that Soviet Union was exporting the model of the socialist agriculture, but lots of problems and lots of differences originated because in origin the land was not nationalized, and it was a precondition in Soviet Union. So, for example, that's why this process lasted so long, because this private farmers did not want to give up, and also many types of cooperative forms were developed, at least in the beginning. And I don't go into details because most of you know these main elements of the socialist agriculture. Listening to my lecture, you will see that how all these actors were active in Hungary later on. And just one more thing, that of course for the Hungarian peasants, this socialist agriculture was very alien to, for example, to work together in brigades, all this remuneration system, this trade work day units were different, and so on. And and of course they did not want to give up their private property. And however, it was the Sovietization of agriculture was in the propaganda advertised like a modernization, and of course there was a real mechanization started, but the mechanization was mainly affecting the state farms and cooperatives, and not so much was helping the private farmers. So, and it is also an important feature that for the Hungarian private farmers, the peasants, the modernization, the mechanization was very much connected with this forceful Soviet collectivization. So they could not really appreciate this because they were partly left out, or so it was also problematic. And however, this secret police was very strong in the early 50s, and all these possible means of state coercion were used during the campaigns. Compulsory delivery quotas were very high, increasing. Taxes imposed on private farms were very high. But most of the private farms refused to join these cooperatives, and of course, as a consequence, there was a huge exodus from the villages to the socialist industrial plants, and of course there was a dramatic shortfall in production, and also coupon system was introduced, so on. And there was a little correction after Stalin's death. It was connected to Imre Nagy government, but when Imre Nagy was kicked out in 1955, then a second collectivization campaign started with the same consequences. And now we are in 1956, and usually 1956 is not really analyzed from the point of view of the countryside, and even the Hungarian publications are focusing what happened in Budapest and in the industrial centers. However, the local communities in the countries and the little villages also reorganized their local municipalities. They formed their future visions. They expressed what they will, what they don't want, and I think it was a very powerful message for the new Kadar regime, which came to power with the help of the Soviet troops, because the industrial workers were on strike in November, December of 1956, and the rural society was more in peace. So Kadar and his team drawing conclusions and trying to understand what were the real reasons of this revolution, they concluded that only with coercion they could not pacify the country. So his famous living standard policy started here, and they also understood that without agriculture they could not raise the living standard of the Hungarian society. So, and it was a sharp, it was very much opposite to the previous policy regarding agriculture, which treated agriculture as an inner colony, which has to serve industrial interest, has to serve industrial working class. So agriculture became a strategic sector after 56, and I think it is the number one precondition understanding the special Hungarian way. And but of course, just like the others, Hungary had to complete the collectivization, and it was a huge task for Kádár, and they did not really, they were not very keen on starting this new collectivization, which the previous Rákosi regime failed twice. So you can imagine that for this government it was a very risky task, but they also knew that it is like a test how they managed this. So they finished this collectivization by 61, and you can imagine what a dramatic change was this, because on place of 1.2 million private farms, by 61 remained only 165,000 individual farms, and the rest of the farmers were forced into 200 collective farms, or as we call in Hungary, agricultural cooperatives, termelőszövetkezet, and there were 270 state farms. So it was a huge success in statistical terms, but this collectivized agriculture was in such a chaotic situation that failed to bring the results what the politicians expected. So Hungary was still importing grain and meat. And for example, when Kádár was invited to Khrushchev, and Khrushchev asked him that, Comrade Kádár, that Hungary was always famous, its agricultural performance, and now you are coming to Moscow and asking grain. How is it possible? And we want to compete with the West, because it was the time when they launched this 20 years plan to catching up the Western countries. So Khrushchev pushed Hungary that you should find a way to increase your own people at least. So after this huge change, which was the collectivization, this challenge appeared, that how to make the cooperatives to work. And you see, I'm using this term learning in this respect, because this Kádár regime was learning from the previous failures, agricultural policy failures. They were learning from other socialist countries. They visited other countries, learning from the good examples or good practices, or they also visited China, and they sent dramatic reports what they should avoid. And I think I shall focusing on these last two terms, that they were ready to learn from peasants, and they ready to learn from the West. And I think it was a paradigmatic change. And you could raise the questions that how was it possible that Kádár János and his was so enlightened, that so much knowledgeable about agriculture? Of course not. But 1956 revolution caused a big change within the party apparatus, because those people who were not only apparatchiks but were more serious in this movement, they try to understand what made wrong and what were the reasons. And there was such a group of apparatus people who had a rural background. For example, their parents were in private farmers, but they became communists. And after 1956, there were forums that they could discuss these problems, what to change, what kind of vision the socialist agriculture should follow. And we should mention that many of these peoples, what I call later on an agrarian lobby, they also visited Western countries in the interwar period. They studied there, they went to study trips, and of course these contacts were not maintained during the Stalinist period, but they did not forget about these experiences, and that's why they started to re-establish their contacts with the Western countries, Western scholars first, and so on. And also they were very well embedded in the countryside. So they were not, when they wanted to know what is a real situation in this collectivized countryside, they were not interested in reading the reports. They went and meet people, former colleagues, and they gained experience. And then they started this process, what does it mean that learning from the peasants? And because 1956, the failure of the revolution, that it was crushed, had of course serious effect on the Hungarian society, because they understood that for a while Hungary will stay within the Soviet bloc. So and they understood that those people who did not leave agriculture as a consequence of the collectivization, they felt that they had to find their own living in this new structure. And this lobby also, and I brought that is Ferenc Erdei, who is in the first lane, and Lajos Fehér and Imre Dimény in this right corner. And I was very lucky to interview this Imre Dimény. For years, he became a Minister of Agriculture later, and he was really an excellent source for me. So these people, and Ferenc Erdei, for example, ran an agricultural economics institute. So they were studying these grassroots initiatives at the collective farm level, because those who stayed within the collective agriculture, of course, they were not satisfied with the Soviet framework. So they wanted to adjust to their local needs, to their work culture, to their needs. And there were three crucial areas where they changed, modified this Soviet model, this kolkhoz model. It was the remuneration, the work organization, and the household farming. Because without these changes, there was such a situation that the new cooperative members worked only fulfilled the minimum requirements in the collective farm, and then they were just focusing on the household plot, which means that there were always lack of shortage labor, lack of labor, and these ways they renewed the incentive system. So with changing this kolkhoz model, they found the ways how they could motivate people to work more and more diligently within this new structure. But it was not coming from above, it was coming from below. And the crucial point that it was mediated by the agrarian lobby. It's because the politicians were not bothering too much, and they were not very much interested in. They were interested in the growing performance, increased performance of the agriculture, because to fulfill these needs of the city people and so on. And the lobby, who knew these both words because they knew how the party state is working, and they knew the agriculture realities and these different subgroups of the rural society. So they became a new mediator, and I think it was also a very important point. And also they paid attention that what was proved by the, for example, the agriculture economic research and calculations, they legalized in 67. And those who know the economic history of the region know that in 68 there was a economic reform in Hungary called New Economic Mechanism, and it made this opening toward the capitalist countries a government priority, which helped a lot for the agrarian sector to open toward the West. But this opening toward the West started already in 1960, because of course Kádár regime wanted to provide cheap meat for consumers, and that's why Hungary purchased this first closed production poultry system from Western Germany. And of course after 68 it was easier. So now I don't want to go into details how they establish or re-establish these contacts. And also this minister Imre Nagy, whose name I mentioned, he became minister in 67, and he really made great efforts to modernize the agriculture, the higher education, agriculture education system, mostly at a higher level, and the agricultural education was not under the Ministry of Education, but it was supervised by the Ministry of Agriculture and Food. So it was also, I think, an important factor. And I think the biggest success story of this Western opening was the Hungarian corn cooperation with the Americans, which started in 68 and really led to a spectacular increase of the average of yields. And this, how these closed production systems were spreading, it was very interesting because, and this I call this Americanization of the Hungarian agriculture, because while the Sovietization was initiated from above, as it was a top-down process, this Americanization was a horizontal process, because the Hungarian collective farms or state farms could get in touch directly with American companies. And the strongest, most successful collective farms and state farms were acting like a system leaders, and they were spreading this new technology, new know-how to the other less capital other companies, and as you could see, this modernization of the education system played a crucial role, because within a very short time, thousands of agricultural engineers with modern know-how, they were ready to implement these Western technologies. And at the same time, there was also an interesting feature of this socialist agriculture, that these collective farms were able to integrate this household plot farming, and these photo it just symbolizes this people, because every cooperative member could have 1 hectare land, and on this 1 hectare he could decide whatever he is growing and what he will do with the products. And of course they were mostly specializing on vegetables or fruits, and the cooperatives were providing the inputs, the seeds, and they were also purchasing, they were buying the products, so they did not have to bother to bring to the markets. And all these different factors led to an enormous, very spectacular increase of production. And you can see that this sharp increase started in the 70s. So these factors together led to a huge increase. So while in the first half of the 60s, Hungary was still importing food, it got changed totally by the 70s, and Hungary was the only country within the socialist bloc which was able to fulfill free markets. The Hungarian market, of course, first of all, and they were able to export not only the Comecon countries, but also to Western countries certain products, of course, which was important because of the hard currency, which the hard currency which was made by the Hungarian exports was used mostly in the socialist industry, which is another problem, which did not have the competitiveness of the whole Hungarian economy. And it was not only, I just showed that also not only the corn was, the average years were growing, but the other, and also the infrastructure in the villages was progressing, and but not because of the villages, the rural infrastructure was so much favored by the central budget, but because of this family accumulation. So people were really working in 2 shifts in the countryside, we could say that. And as also Hungary is a small country, so many families chose such a family strategy that usually the man was commuting daily or weekly basis, and the women stayed in the villages working in the agriculture, doing this work in the household plots. But they could build these new houses, modernize that. So the bathrooms in the Hungarian village houses appeared in the 70s. And it was really thanks to this enormous work in this of the village families. And of course, now we know that this huge growth had many negative environmental consequences, and also this self-exploitation of the village people had also consequences. But historians, we should analyze these processes together. And I just wanted to mention my book because at this point, because I think it's very important to analyze these 4 decades of the socialist agriculture within one framework. And I think this transfer, that 2 trans-systemic transfers happened and shaped the Hungarian agriculture in the second half of the 20th century. It was, I think, very important. And I tried also in my book to combine somehow these macro level decisions and also this with some case studies which showed how the local communities adjusted, what kind of strategies they developed. And in my last the last part of my lecture, a very short summary of what happened after the change of political system. So, as I mentioned you, that there was again a big change, because the first freely elected government favored private, so small-scale farming based on private property, and that's why. And they combined the privatization with the restitution, so compensation strategies, and they wanted to transform this cooperative sector very short time, let's say within 2 years, to a small-scale agriculture. And the problem appeared that, and of course it was successful because as a consequence of this restitution, these new owners appeared very quickly, and by the time of the EU accession, private ownership was close to the 90%. But as during the restitution, not only who lost their landed property could buy land, but those, for example, who lost, whose little workshop in the city was nationalized in the 50s, they received these vouchers, which I wanted to scarpot last year. And I made a long list what you could do with these vouchers. And with these vouchers, you could buy land wherever you wanted, and which caused enormous tension within the countryside, because totally unknown people appeared with their vouchers and purchased land. And as this transformation of the agriculture was going parallel with the transformation and privatization of the industry, and a huge unemployment appeared, and those families who were very successful in the 70s, 80s, who were standing on 2 pillars, that one person was working in the socialist and one in the socialist agriculture, and these family strategies simply collapsed because the men became unemployed, went back to the village, and they could buy usually with their vouchers just 2 or 3 hectares. So a very fragmented ownership structure appeared. So there was, in the first half of 90s, that within the 10 million population, 2 million landowners appeared. So every 5th person owned land, which is, you can imagine that I think it was nothing to do with the modern agriculture. It was again just it was hiding the unemployment, because these people, after they their unemployment fee was finished, they were not visible as unemployed, because the politicians thought that you received 2 or 3 hectares, you should live from this. So, but you see that even so, how the Hungarian agriculture entered the EU, that 72% of the farms belong to the category of this less than 1 hectare. And again, on the other hand, those who or these upper categories, of course, had enough land, but this this caused very serious problems, and a new type of poverty, a new segregation appeared in the villages, and this gives just you an image about what kind of new actors appeared the villages. So there are hundreds of thousands still self-sufficient little farms, but they are not visible for the EU registration, of course. And there is a very few 10,000 farmers who are farmers in this EU sense, and as there are some few large-scale corporate farms which could not own land, because they are out of the game, so they are renting the land. And the last data what I would like to emphasize at the end of my lecture, that in the 21st century, the structure of the Hungarian landed property is very similar how we started in the 30s. So that category who is above 500 hectares now again owns the more than 1/3 of the Hungarian agricultural land. And you can imagine that these are very much mechanized farms, specializing in crop and grain production, so providing very few jobs for this local. And I think it is very big tension, and I think it will be a challenge of the coming decade. So thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions or remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this interesting lecture. I will move closer.
Yeah.
So you are all invited, of course, to ask questions, to set a debate together with Dr. Varga. Also, for our viewers on Zoom, it's possible to type the questions, and we will ask her. So, please. Okay, Leo.
Thank you for your very, very interesting lecture first. But my question is a little bit, not, let's say, obscure one, but still very interesting. You said in the beginning that the brigade system didn't work, the collective farms, because supposedly peasants were not used to it. It was pretty much the same story as in Slovenia. The brigade system just didn't work, and the family system based by family labor persisted. Still, as you said, the history of Hungary, you had these large estates. Something like actually didn't exist in the ancien regime before the socialist revolution in Slovenia. So it makes sense in Slovenia why it didn't work. But now I would like to ask you, what was the mode of production at these old large noblemen's estates? I think it should be, well, I'm just thinking about, not so different as the future brigade system. I mean, certainly large estates cannot be tilled with family labor units, but I assume some different labor units, more industrial, I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. It was a very, very good question, and of course, there was not enough time to go into details, but it is a vital question and gives a chance to me to go back to this heterogeneous inner structure of the Hungarian peasant society, and those who before 45 were working on these large estates. Of course, as you correctly mentioned, for them the socialist brigade were not very unknown, and these first collective farms were recruited members from these social groups, because many of them, even if they received land in 45, they did not have the proper expertise, because they generation long they were used to that somebody told them every day what we should do today, which field, yeah. And later, so for them, the brigade leader was not a novelty, and of course many of them could not become successful private farmer within these 5 years. So they gave up this private farming more easily and joined, and there were differences. In that sense, my statement was characteristic for those landed peasantry. So, but also, when I was making interviews with those women who worked in these brigades in the 60s, 70s, and I also realized that, for example, for the women to listen to the male brigade leaders' orders were nothing new, because earlier their father or their husband defined what to do usually. So it was a patriarchy system. So a brigade, so also it was not their problem that. So it is also interesting.
It was not far from the family mode of production.
Yeah, it was a problem for men that, for example, a peasant who owned, let's say, 25 hectares, and he was successful, let's say, in pig breeding or anything else, and then somebody who had less land or was landless from his village or was and now he became his superior, and that was
the exact case. I was found in Ljubljana in 1951 when one woman said, "No, I'm not gonna be a swan shepherd. I've never been one." And the beggar, so they called those who supervised, who were chairmen, so these new collective farms, he will not give me commands.
Yeah. And many men, that's why left the agriculture, because they did not want to. They were own masters, and they did not want to be a servant. But also there was no time now to refer when we analyzing these family decisions, how to react these changes, that there was a huge difference between the insurance which could enjoy the industrial workers and it could enjoy the cooperative members. And yesterday we were discussing this on Monday. So all these factors must be taken into account when we analyzing the family or small communities' reactions to these changes.
Okay. Yes, please.
One question. I was lucky to read your book, and in your book you emphasized that during the political changes of 89-90, a lot of valuable brands have disappeared. Recognized Hungarian brands which were very successful not only in the domestic but also on international markets. My question is, how is it possible that the brand awareness that was already there in the 60s, as you mentioned, Norman, that they did not take it into the consideration when the political system got changed?
Mm.
Who was behind those bad decisions which made the companies' brand names disappear?
I think I cannot give a proper answer. I think there's no one factor to this, but what I wanted to emphasize regarding this post-socialist changes that I think the big discrepancy and big tension is that there were no social debates about how the future of the agriculture should be reshaped. So this new government had a clear vision that state property and cooperative property does not serve the benefits of this country. So very quickly we should switch to private property, and private property and market mechanism will solve every problem. And there was an enormous loss in machinery, in expertise, in everything, because by that time everything was suitable for this large scale, and those who were working in the agriculture had just a very special expertise. So how could they become a farmer from one day to another? And I think it's the comparative perspective is very useful also here, because if we study how Germany reshaped, transformed its agriculture, I think it's a very good lesson, because nowadays, I don't know how familiar you are with the German agriculture present situation, that the German agriculture consists of two different structures. Western part is based on family farm, but the eastern part based on large private large farms, but in private property. So when they transformed the East German socialist agriculture, they privatized everything, but the credit policy, all these regulations were shaped that way that they did not support a 1 hectare farm or a 2 hectare farm. They said that in crop production and animal husbandry, this large scale is efficient. So, and they were, of course, there were huge debates, fierce debates in the parliament, but and there were social dialogue, social discussions, which in Hungary, there were only these politicians felt clever enough, and I know that it is recorded, but it's true. Jacques?
Yes,
Thank you, Zsuzsanna. I have actually two questions. One question is regarding the fragmented structures, which is obviously which connect the pre-war period with the present day situation. And of course, that raises one question, which I'm raising from the Slovenian situation, of course, that it is probably similar to the Hungarian case. Was there any discussion who in fact the peasant is? Because this is one of the crucial questions on the countryside. But this is also one of the crucial questions for the creator of the different politics, because they don't know who the peasant is. How can they design the proper policies? And in Slovenia there was already in the 30s discussion who the farmer is. And the only measure which they agreed at that time was the income structure of the farm. And the income structure is, if you have more than 50% of your incomes outside of agriculture, in fact, you are not farmers. And because there were also other statistical data which shows that farm, if it could be called farm up to the 5 hectares, was able to survive less than 4 people. And the average Slovenian average family at that time and in the countryside it was a little bit larger, was around 5 family members. So even at that farm, even at that time they started to think that the family farm, they need to create family farm around 10 hectares.
Yeah.
And that would be the base of the. And on the contrary to that, and it is a contradiction that actually in the communist period they created such a farm, as a majority of such a farm, with the idea, with this land reform and with the limitation up to the 10 hectares. And were this kind of discussion in the period of transition existed? Because in Slovenian agricultural policy institution, there is a very obvious direction toward the family farms, as large as possible to be. And the second question, I didn't quite understand well how the privatization process of the former cooperatives was done. Because in Slovenia that was one of the crucial questions during the transition period, and at the end they somehow decided to give to the farmers, to the new established and or renovated or the socialist cooperative, 40% of the share during the privatization process of different former socialist or state agricultural enterprises.
Yeah, it's a huge topic. I mean, you raised two big questions, and unfortunately, I think this income, the family's income structure, I think was never a reference point to define who is a peasant. It was always just the number of the owned hectares, and I think in interwar period only very few farms registered properly their income structure, and unfortunately even today it is, I think, such inherited that these self-subsistence farm don't run any proper registration. They don't count their own workforce. It is not included as a factor. So and I'm searching a proper English translation for this terminology. What was introduced, it is a very old phrase, and it is even not a peasant, but it is called in Hungarian is őstermelő, that and this term is used. I mean, the definition of this term is that, let's say that if you have got, 300 million forints income per year, then you don't have to pay taxes, as you belong to this category. And just imagine that in Hungary, nobody pays taxes after the land. I don't know how is it in Slovenia.
Yeah, probably more or less the same.
Really? Okay. Yeah, and how this collective farms privatization went, they had to. So. There were. They had to allocate their land into 3 categories. To those who they had to give these 2 or 3 hectares to everybody who were working actually in the collective farms that time in early 90s, no matter whether their family owned land or not. Then the second category was who were elderly people who still owned land and it was on their own registry, but were retired already. And the third category were those people who received the compensation after their family land was lost, and they could buy land with their vouchers from the collective farms, and they had to also do a similar with the machinery and buildings. Such shares they had to give to the ancestors of those who were the first cooperative members, those who were actually working, and this retired man. So it was very heterogeneous ownership groups appeared with very different interests, and as the political priority was favoring this, establishing these new small farms, it was easy to take out your shares and start, and especially people and these collective farms in this very unstable situation, they could not provide jobs. So within 2 years, 600,000 unemployed appeared in the countryside because they fired their people. Because when you did not know that next year you will be the collective farm could cultivate certain lands, then you could not make a plan. So it was just really a total chaos. Many uncultivated, lots of uncultivated land. There is a huge drop in production. So it was huge. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's, yeah. Yeah.
I have more questions.
Yeah.
Maybe to add to this question, was this this private collective farms were also the cases that were then what happened to the land? Was they bought by international cooperation and I don't know, have a lot of land and to organize a new kind of collective private enterprise, or was everything fragmented? I'm quite surprised because I always, when I drive through Hungary, I always see this lot of cultivated land. I always thought that it was just it was collectivized and then privatized in the 90s, not
no.
fragmented. So it came
What
as a surprise to me.
Yeah, what you see, it is these huge parcels are rented by such corporate or bigger private farms from maybe 200,000 small owners.
Oh.
So you can imagine what a efficient structure that say this rental fee is always there. So they are renting because this so the bigger private farmers are renting from those little ones because many so huge masses of people, city people now owners of land, but they, of course, they don't want or could not run an agricultural enterprise, so they are renting their land, and but it is really a nightmare. I have regularly making interviews such.
I suppose
Bigger,
there's a lot of problem for all those, I don't know, corporations that need to pay also.
Yeah.
So maybe it's not competitive to comparing to other countries. So they have to pay small owners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is really not
Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you. It's very interesting to see.
Yeah.
But I also find intriguing and funny that intriguing, maybe mostly that introduction of the collectivization brought a lot of decrease of production, and also the end of collectivization brought decrease of
and a huge loss. So you can imagine that this machinery, the buildings, everything were not for private farming, and these new owners with their vouchers could not, many times they could not just buy 1/4 of a tractor, and nobody wanted to cooperate. And then sometimes the tractor was just became rusty and nobody used, so economists try to count, assume how big was this loss, but yeah, and I just finish, I think, with this description what I put into the flyer, that Hungary has got such excellent conditions for agriculture that it's really for a historian it's really a challenge to understand that how we end up here. Yeah.
Thank you for the answer.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Do we have something more to ask? I have one small question for the end. I was interested in this family economy structure, income structure. Did the majority of the families found one person in industry, or was it more common for part of the family members to work in collective sector of agriculture, and then also at this 1 hectare that they could have?
Yeah. Of course, general, so there are just tendencies, but we know that how these village families reacted. That of course the generation issue played a role, because those who were elderly did not change, so they just simply stayed in the villages. But then only one person joined the agriculture, because others were working on his name or and collecting these work units, but because it was one option. Then the other for example, these former servants who got used already to this communal work, then sometimes 3 or 4 family members joined the cooperative. And then there was another option when there was a industrial center nearby, and as I mentioned, that industrial workers enjoyed much better insurance, and they could retire earlier than cooperative members. Then they thought that, okay, the best workforce from the family should go to the industry. And of course, I forgot to mention that until the end of 60s, in socialist agriculture, there were no regular monthly cash payments. So it was also important to have somebody in the industry and the service sector who brought regular cash on a monthly basis. So there were different, and of course locally, and knowing that what were the family social backgrounds before the Second World War.
So different strategies depending on the period, on the family.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So this was another lecture in our History at the Edge series. Thank you all for participating, and thank you.
Thank you for the
Varga,
invitation,
for your interesting lecture.
and thank you for your remarks and questions. Thank you.